Have you ever done something that felt right deep in your bones, only to wake up the next day and feel absolutely terrible about it? Maybe you finally told someone, "I can't do this anymore." Maybe you stopped replying to their texts, stepped away from a one-sided friendship, or decided not to pick up the phone one more time. And then came that sinking feeling, that voice in your head whispering, "You're a bad person. You gave up. You should have tried harder." If you felt that way, you're not alone. And you're not weak. In fact, you may have done something incredibly brave, and your heart just needs time to catch up. Today we're going to talk about something many of us don't discuss enough: how to let go of toxic relationships without carrying the weight of guilt. Especially after 60, our time and emotional energy become more precious than ever. And yet, we often find ourselves still carrying people and pain that should have been set down years ago. This video is for those of you who are tired of the emotional weight, who want peace more than people-pleasing, who are learning, maybe for the first time, that you are allowed to put yourself first, even if someone else doesn't like it. We're going to talk about how guilt isn't always a sign you've done something wrong, how to build boundaries that heal instead of hurt, and why protecting your emotional space is not selfish. It's sacred. So let's begin with something we all feel, but few of us understand clearly: that heavy, lingering feeling of guilt. You see, guilt can be tricky. It can show up even when you've made the right choice, especially when the relationship you've stepped away from was with someone you used to love, or still do. A friend, a sibling, even a child, or a longtime partner. The guilt doesn't whisper, it screams. And it says, "Look what you did." But here's what I want you to hear right now, and really hear it. Feeling guilt is not always a sign that you've done something wrong. Sometimes it's just proof that you have a heart, that you care, that you wrestle with hard choices instead of pretending they're easy. What many people call guilt is actually something else entirely. It's grief. Grief that the relationship didn't turn out the way you hoped. Grief for the version of you who tried for years to make it work. Grief for the moments that felt real, even if the connection ultimately wasn't healthy. And you know what? That grief deserves compassion. Not shame, not self-blame, just space. We were taught growing up that pain meant something had gone wrong. So when we step away from someone and then feel that ache, we assume we made a mistake. But let me ask you this: can't something be painful and still be the right decision? Think about a time in your life when you left a job, moved away from a city, or even downsized a home. It hurt, but it opened a new door. Sometimes leaving someone behind is just like that. Not easy, but necessary. So, if you've been carrying guilt after cutting someone off, or even just stepping back, I want you to pause and ask yourself, am I really feeling guilt? Or am I mourning the version of that relationship I wish had existed? Because those are two very different things. And you don't need to apologize for grieving. Now, once we begin to understand that guilt may actually be grief, we can move towards something even more powerful: boundaries. And I know that word doesn't always feel comfortable, does it? For a lot of us, especially those who grew up in families where being nice meant being agreeable, or where we were taught not to rock the boat, boundaries feel like a bad thing. Like walls. Like something we use to punish or push people away. But that's not what real boundaries are. Not the healthy ones anyway. Let me share something I've learned after talking to countless people in their 60s, 70s, and beyond. The most open-hearted, compassionate, loving people. They're also the ones with the strongest boundaries. Why? Because they've learned that love, without limits, turns into resentment. That being constantly available doesn't build connection, it builds exhaustion. That saying yes when your whole body is screaming no is not kindness. It's self-betrayal. And that betrayal doesn't just live in your emotions. It starts to wear down your health. your sleep, your peace of mind. If you've been the fixer, the peacekeeper, the one everyone turns to, boundaries might feel foreign at first. You've probably spent years, maybe even decades, putting everyone else first. Maybe it's a grown child who only calls when they need money, or a friend who talks about their problems for hours, but never asks how you're doing. But here's the hard truth that turns into real freedom. You don't owe anyone unlimited access to you. Not your time, not your emotional energy, not your constant availability. And yes, when you start setting boundaries, it might upset some people, especially the ones who benefited from your lack of them. They might call you selfish, cold, unkind. But what they're really saying is, you've changed, and I liked it better when you put me first. But changing isn't the problem. The real issue is that you finally realized your needs matter too. Let me ask you something personal. How many times have you said yes when you wanted to say no? How many times have you listened and supported and smiled while something inside you was screaming for someone to care for you? That kind of living is not sustainable. It wears you down in ways you don't even notice, until one day you wake up and you don't recognize yourself anymore. That's why setting boundaries is not about pushing people away. It's about choosing the relationships that are mutual, respectful, and healthy, and letting go of the ones that cost you too much. Boundaries don't say, "I don't love you." They say, "I love me too." And that's something we're allowed to say, even if we were never taught how. So if you're just starting this journey, if you've taken that brave step back, and now you're sitting in the discomfort wondering whether you've done the right thing, I want you to take a deep breath and remember this. Guilt is not the enemy, and grief is not a sign of weakness. You are allowed to feel both. You're allowed to love someone and still know they're not good for you. You're allowed to let go, even if it breaks your heart a little. And you are absolutely allowed to create space in your life where respect, peace, and love can grow, even if that means some people won't be joining you in this next season. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be honest with yourself, with your limits, with what you're willing and no longer willing to carry. Because the truth is, you've spent enough years making others comfortable. It's time you get to be comfortable in your own skin too. Let's keep going. There's a kind of tired that sleep can't fix. You know the one I'm talking about. It sits deep in your bones. It's the kind of weariness that no nap or vacation can wash away. It's not from working too hard or staying up too late. It's the kind that comes from carrying a relationship on your back for too long. Maybe you've been the one constantly calling, checking in, trying to keep the peace. Maybe you've stayed quiet to avoid conflict. You've explained, forgiven, made excuses, over and over. And somewhere along the way, you stopped noticing how heavy it all became. You just got used to it. Until one day, you didn't. That, my friend, is emotional exhaustion. And it's not just a feeling, it's a signal. A message from your mind, your body, and your heart, telling you something needs to change. Emotional burnout isn't dramatic. It doesn't always come with a big explosion or an argument. Sometimes it shows up quietly. You stop sleeping well. You feel irritated over small things. You dread seeing someone's name pop up on your phone. Or you just feel numb, like you've given so much of yourself. There's nothing left to give. And yet, when the idea of stepping away enters your mind, guilt shows up again. Loud, heavy, cruel. It tells you that a good friend wouldn't walk away. A good daughter would keep showing up. A loving partner would stick it out no matter what. But I want you to consider something you might have never been told. Maybe you're not too sensitive. Maybe the relationship was too draining. Think about that. We don't always need to toughen up or push through. Sometimes we need to listen to that inner whisper that says, "This doesn't feel good anymore." And if you've reached that breaking point, if you've stepped away from a toxic or emotionally demanding relationship. I want you to know that you didn't give up. You gave enough. Because the truth is, the people who feel the most guilt after leaving aren't the ones who didn't try. They're the ones who tried for too long, who stayed longer than they should have, who held on hoping things would change until holding on started breaking them. It's a slow kind of heartbreak, the kind you rarely talk about, but it matters, and it's valid. You don't need permission to say, "I can't keep doing this." You don't need approval to protect your well-being. You don't owe anyone your peace, especially not someone who consistently robs you of it. And I know that sounds harsh, especially if you're someone who prides yourself on being loyal, loving, easy to get along with. But being easy to be around isn't the same as being authentically loved. Let me say that again. Being easy to be around isn't the same as being loved. Real love, the kind that's mutual and life-giving, doesn't ask you to betray yourself. It doesn't ask you to stay silent. It doesn't thrive off your exhaustion. And yet, many of us were taught the opposite. We were taught that being a good person means being endlessly available. That love means sacrifice. That if someone hurts us, it's our job to understand them, be patient, forgive. But there comes a point where sacrifice becomes self-abandonment. And you are not here to abandon yourself. Now, I want to talk to the part of you that might still be hesitating. That small, trembling part that says, "But what if they fall apart without me?" It's a question I hear often, especially from older adults, from people who've always been the glue in their families, the ones who hold everything and everyone together. Let me say this with compassion. You are not responsible for holding broken pieces that refuse to be mended. You are not selfish for letting someone feel the consequences of their actions. You are not cruel for choosing peace over chaos. Some people only grow when their comfort is disrupted. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do, for both of you, is step away. And yes, it will be uncomfortable. It may bring tears, doubt, late nights wondering, did I do the right thing? But discomfort doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means you're doing something new. And new things always feel unfamiliar at first. But what's on the other side of that discomfort? Something beautiful, something healing. Space. Space to breathe, to rest, to hear your own thoughts, to reconnect with the parts of yourself that got lost in the noise. And in that space, you start to grow again. You start to remember who you were before you spent all your energy trying to fix things. You realize you're still loving, still kind, still generous, just no longer at your own expense. Let me tell you something else that may surprise you. You are allowed to change the terms of how people access you. Just because you've always been the listener, the helper, the one who always answers the phone, doesn't mean you're obligated to keep playing that role forever. You can evolve. You can say, "This doesn't work for me anymore," and walk away. Even if you used to say yes. That's not being flaky. That's being honest. And honesty, even when it hurts, is far more respectful than showing up halfway, tired and disconnected. You are allowed to stop letting people feed on your emotional energy like it's an open buffet, because the truth is, not everyone deserves access to you. Not everyone has earned the right to be in your heart, your mind, your daily life. That might sound harsh, but it's healthy. When you start to treat your time, your peace, your energy like the valuable resources they are, something shifts. You no longer feel resentful. You feel clear. You feel strong. You feel like you again. And the people who truly love you, the ones who are emotionally safe and grounded, they won't be threatened by your boundaries. They might not love them at first, but they'll respect them. They'll adjust. They'll stay. Because healthy relationships don't crumble when you say, "I need space." They grow. Unhealthy relationships, on the other hand, will push back. They'll guilt trip. They'll question you, twist your words, make you feel like the bad guy. But that reaction, that's not about your boundary being wrong. That's about the dysfunction your boundary just exposed. So if someone pulls away when you stop bending over backward for them, that's okay. Let them go. You're not here to carry the entire emotional weight of a relationship on your own. You're allowed to outgrow people. You're allowed to walk away without hating them. You're allowed to love someone deeply and still choose not to let them back in. Because love without limits is not love. It's a slow erosion of self. And you, my friend, are worth more than that. Let's take a moment and just breathe. Because what you've done, or what you're considering doing, takes courage. Real, honest, raw courage. Letting go of someone you care about, even if they've hurt you, isn't easy. It shakes your sense of identity. It brings up questions you didn't expect. It leaves you sitting in silence, wondering, am I really allowed to do this? Yes, you are. You are allowed to choose peace. You are allowed to prioritize your health, not just physical but emotional, mental, spiritual. And you are allowed to set a new standard for what kind of energy is welcome in your life moving forward. But that doesn't mean it won't hurt. Because here's the truth many people don't talk about. You can grieve someone who is still alive. You can miss the memories, the connection, the laughter. You can mourn the version of the relationship you once believed in, even while accepting that it can't continue. And that grief, that ache in your chest that lingers, even after making the right choice, that doesn't mean you made a mistake. It means it mattered. It means you're human. Sometimes we expect grief to only show up after death. But the heart doesn't work that way. It grieves change. It grieves distance. It grieves the stories we told ourselves, the ones where the person would eventually see our worth, change their ways, love us how we needed to be loved. But when reality doesn't match that story, we're left with a decision. We either keep rewriting ourselves to fit the relationship, or we rewrite the relationship to protect ourselves. You chose the second. And that's not wrong. That's healing. Letting go, even when it's necessary, rarely feels clean. There are always loose threads, moments of doubt, flashbacks that tug at your heart, the sound of a voice, the memory of a birthday, the feeling that maybe, just maybe, things could have turned out differently. But even if they could have, it doesn't mean you had to be the one to suffer while waiting for it. At this stage of life, whether you're 60, 70, 80, or beyond, time is not something we take lightly anymore. Every day is a gift. Every ounce of energy matters. And you deserve to spend that energy in places where it's returned, not drained. That doesn't mean you stop loving people. It means you stop loving them in ways that erase your own well-being. Now, if guilt is still clinging to your shoulders, if it's still whispering that you're cold or selfish or dramatic, I want you to ask yourself a simple but powerful question. Is this guilt trying to teach me something, or is it trying to keep me small? Because not all guilt is created equal. There is a kind of guilt that helps us grow. That says, I acted outside of my values. I want to make it right. That guilt is healthy. It leads to repair, to ownership, to humility. But that's not the guilt we're talking about here. The guilt you feel after letting someone go is often the guilt of finally choosing yourself in a world that praises self-sacrifice. And that's a very different kind of guilt. That guilt doesn't mean you're heartless. It means your heart finally started listening to you. And here's something else that's important to remember. You don't need to explain your healing. You don't need to justify your peace. Not everyone will understand the decisions you've made. Some may judge, some may gossip, some may twist the story to make themselves feel better. But none of that changes your truth. Because at the end of the day, you're the one who had to live inside the relationship. You're the one who carried the emotional weight. You're the one who finally reached your limit and made the hard, holy choice to say, no more. And that choice deserves honor, not shame. There's a moment I see in people, a kind of quiet strength, when they finally say, I matter too. Sometimes they whisper it through tears. Sometimes they say it out loud for the very first time. And sometimes they don't say anything at all. They just start living like it's true. That is where healing begins. Healing doesn't always look like a sunrise. Sometimes it's slow and messy. One minute you feel free, the next you're sobbing in the car. Some days you feel proud of your decision. Other days you question everything. That's okay. That's normal. Healing is not a straight line. It curves. It pauses. It loops back on itself. But it moves. And if you stay kind to yourself, if you stay honest, it will carry you forward. So, if you're walking this path, if you've let someone go and you're navigating the grief, the guilt, the new silence, I want you to know this. You did something hard, and hard doesn't mean wrong. You acted out of truth. You acted out of self-respect. You acted out of love. Love for the version of yourself that deserves to be seen, supported, and safe. And that kind of love, that's worth everything. You don't owe anyone unlimited access to you. Not your past, not your family, not even someone who once meant the world to you. You owe yourself honesty, peace, rest, joy, the chance to live the next chapter of your life free from emotional survival mode. So let this be a gentle reminder. You are not a bad person for having limits. You're not cold for saying enough. You're not broken because you couldn't fix it. You are wise. You are healing. You are reclaiming your power. And yes, there will be days when the past tugs at your heart. That's part of the process. But don't let that tug pull you back into something you had the strength to leave. Let it remind you of how far you've come. So take a breath. Feel your feet on the ground. Look around at this new space you've created in your life. It might feel unfamiliar right now, maybe even a little lonely. But it's space for something better, something kinder, something true. You deserve relationships that feel like home, not like a battlefield. You deserve to be loved in ways that don't require you to shrink or apologize or explain yourself constantly. You deserve peace. And if no one has told you this in a while, I'm proud of you for feeling the ache, for making the hard call, for carrying your truth, even when it was heavy. So as you continue forward, hold your head high, not in arrogance, but in quiet confidence. Confidence in the woman or man you are becoming, in the heart that chose growth over guilt, in the soul that said, I matter, because you do. And if this video spoke to something in your heart, if it helped you feel even a little less alone, I invite you to leave a comment and share your story. You never know who you might help just by speaking your truth. And if you found this helpful, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Strong Elderly Life for more conversations just like this. Ones that remind you it's never too late to heal, to grow, and to honor your voice. Here's to setting boundaries with love. Here's to letting go without shame. And here's to living your life rooted in peace, not guilt. You've got this.